All right, so let's get started building an AWS Elastic Beanstalk application with PowerShell. All right, so the first thing we have to do is create an Elastic Beanstalk application. To do that, we can use the New-EBApplication command, and I will go ahead and execute that there. And now you can see that it didn't return any errors, which is a really good thing for our purposes. And you can see here that we have returned an object, and we have now created an application called TextSnips. All right, great. So first task done. Next thing we need to do is we need to build the environment. The environment is the host that the application is going to be run on. So the first thing we have to do is figure out what we call the solution stack name, essentially the operating system that's going to be running on, as well as the IIS version. And to find that, we use the get EBAvailable solution stack list command. And inside of that command returns a property called solution stack details. So to look at that, you can see here that I have got quite a bit of options here. I can run it on Linux, Amazon Linux, Ubuntu, Debian, Windows Server. I can run it on a lot of different things. So for this instance, I'm just going to choose the 64-bit server core 2012 R2 running IIS 8.5. I could have chosen anything, but we'd have to pick one, so I'll just go ahead and pick that one. So now that we know the host that it's going to be running on, or the solution stack name as far as the New-EBEnvironment command is concerned, then we need to run New-EBEnvironment. And the parameters for that is the application name, which we just created, which is TextSnips. The environment name, which can be anything, could be, you know, your test environment, your prod environment, whatever, it doesn't matter. The solution stack name, which is the host that we just looked at. The tier type, which is going to be either standard or worker. If you're going to be deploying a web service or a web app, it's always going to be standard. And for the tier name, we're not going to be doing a web worker. It's going to be always a web server in this instance as well. All right, so with that being said, now let's go ahead and run that. And hopefully we can create the environment. And yes, no errors, which is a good thing. And notice that we did create the environment. So now we have an application and we have an environment that it can run on top of. Next up, I'm just going to create a package. Now, normally your package will contain web artifacts like your HTML files, ASP stuff, ODB3 strings, all this stuff that goes in a web app. But for just this purpose, I'm just have a single folder called my package folder, and it contains file.txt. That's it. I just need something to send up there. And once I have the folder, then I'm going to create the zip file using compress archive. Now, in this instance, notice that it does say that since it already exists, the compress archive sends me that error, so I can go ahead and just fix that real quick, and I will just update it. And then it updates with whatever the archive needs in it. All right. So next up, we need a place to send the package to. It needs to be in S3. So if you have an S3 bucket, you can use that. If not, you can use new S3 bucket, and I will just create a S3 bucket called TextSnips app, just a bucket name to send the package up to. Next up, we need to upload the package to S3. We do that with write S3 object, and you can see it's pretty simple. I specify the bucket name and the file that I would like to upload. The package always has to be zipped, so that's why we use compress archive before. All right, next up, we need to actually increment the version. So an EBS or Elastic Beanstalk application has a particular version, and we need to increment that if we want to start creating them. So on line 43 there, you have a version label. That could be anything you want. It just needs to be unique. Since it's going to be a version label, it's always a good idea to have something tied to the date. And by using the now method and using the ticks property on that, that just gives me the current time in ticks. So if I run that, you can see that it's the number of ticks that represent the current time. So it's just a good way to specify the version label. And then once I have that, I specify all the things that I created before, like the application name, the source bundle, the S3 bucket, the bucket that we just uploaded to, and finally the package name that is in S3. All right, so once I have all that information, I can go ahead and run that, and you can see that I have created it. So we've now created a new application version. Once you create the application version, then you need to actually update the environment. So we've created the application, and the application knows that it's now pointing at package.zip. So it is pointing at those files. But now we actually need to deploy it to the environment. And to do that deployment, we use Update-EBEnvironment, specifying the application name, the environment name that we created before, which was testing, and the version label, and we need to tell it which version we will be deploying to the environment. All right, so I'll go ahead and run that. All right, let's see here. It says environment name testing is in an invalid state for this operation, must be ready. All right, that is probably because the environment was just provisions and it's not actually created yet. So let's do some impromptu testing here, and we can run get EBEnvironment, check and see what the status is. Okay, the status says launching and the health is gray. So at this point, we just have to wait for this to come up. Since we didn't choose anything fancy by any means for the environment, it may take a little bit to come up. So we'll just wait for a minute for this to come up. And while we're doing that, I'll just run this a couple more times to see if we can get this to come up. So, yep. So right at this point, I'm just going to run get EBEnvironment for a few more times. And then once that comes up, we will continue on. All right, now it looks like the status is ready and the health is green, as you can see there in the terminal window. So we are ready to proceed. Now we can run Update-EBEnvironment to deploy the new version of our application. All right, now you can see the status is in a state of updating and the health is gray again because it's in the process of deploying that. All right, so now let's check this and see if this is going to take a little bit. All right, it's still updating. All right, so now I'm going to go over to the management console to see what this looks like in there. All right, I'm here at my management console, and now I can go over here to Elastic Beanstalk, and then I have a few other ones that I was working with, but we're now working with TechSnips, so I can go to TechSnips, and then you can see that it's gray here. It'll turn green if it's getting ready, so I can click on that. And then now you can see that Elastic Beanstalk is updating your environment. And here's where you can get all of the latest and greatest information. You can see that we have the configuration, which is Windows Server 2012. It is telling me there's a newer version available, so we could use IIS 10. It's going to tell us the version. Now it shows the health is green, and we can continue and manage this environment or this web app any way that we feel necessary. So there's a lot of different things we can do. So there's the version, there's the file. So we have successfully deployed the package. All right, so now let's go back to the ISE. But in typical PowerShell fashion and laziness, I am extremely lazy, and I don't want to have to remember to run all this stuff again. I could create a script to do this. I like to create functions, that way I can run these any instance that I like. So I've created a function here called new AWS Beanstalk app. And this function brings together all of that functionality that I just created, but adds a few as well. So a lot of this may look familiar. You have application name, description, but notice that we have environment type now. We have environment type, create environment name, deploy environment name. Those are a little bit different, and wait for environment. Because there may be times when you need to deploy this application to different environments, like I was mentioning earlier, a test production environment, that sort of thing. We can actually use this function to create multiple environments at the same time, or if we choose to deploy to different environments too. I'm not going to go over this in detail. This is available to you to download with this snip. Suffice it to say, we've added a lot of this functionality. One of the big things here on starting on line 55 there, we're using the stopwatch object. Before, we had to constantly keep running get EWSApplicationEnvironment to keep trying to figure out what the status of it is. With this code, we can just wait for it. It'll just wait and wait and wait and wait until it's actually done. And it goes through and just does everything for us. So it's a really great time saver. So let's go ahead and see if we can run this. I will bring this into my session, and let's hope it works. I don't know if I've actually tested this all the way through, but now you can see that we've consolidated of the 60 lines that we had before. We've consolidated those into just a few lines here. So in this instance, we're just creating one called my new app. We're using that environment type. We are creating a different environment called test-env when we're going to be deploying the package to test-env, and we have the package folder path, the S3 bucket name, and we're going to be using verbose so we can see some more information. So let's go ahead and see if this runs. Cross your fingers. Okay, notice with the verbose output, it tells us that the environment was already created. That's because I was playing with this earlier. This is one of the great things about using this function. It first checks before it actually tries. If it would have tried to create the environment right off the bat, it would have errored out. Now the function is smart. Now we don't have to keep running the get EB environment all the time to figure out if the environment is finally up to date. It will tell us when it is. So we'll just sit here and wait until the environment is up to date, and then it will continue on throughout the code path that we have went through earlier. All right, now you can see that it did check a few times. Looks like it checked, what, 5 times, I think, to see if the environment was up to date. And then when the environment was finally up to date, then it told us environment update successful. And if that's the case, let's go down here through the code and make sure that it got there. There's a say waiting for environment update successful. Yes, so if we got to that point, it went through the entire function. Now we can go back over here to S3 and check and see what it looks like. So we've got, let's see here. I think we called that my new app, right? Yep. My new app, it's green, running version. There's our ver label that we had created. It is running version IIS 10. We can check the environments. Yep. And there's my new app.zip. So it worked great. So that is how to create an AWS Beanstalk app and deploy a new package to it with PowerShell.